On September 11, 2001, 19 young men hijacked and crashed 4 airplanes into symbolic American sites along the eastern seaboard. These men were members of Al-Qaeda, an international political group that draws upon Islam to justify its use of terror tactics. Osama bin Laden, a wealthy and charismatic Saudi Arabian, founded Al-Qaeda in 1988 to mobilize Middle Easterners for global jihad. Jihad, which literally means struggle, is interpreted by militant Islamists as the obligation to wage war in the name of Allah against all non-Muslims. As Al-Qaeda has emerged on the global stage to act upon bin Laden's ideology, it has introduced an innovation in terrorism through its exploitation of the internet. Al-Qaeda's internet strategy has impacted the world by spawning an international network of decentralized terror cells united by a common ideology. The global spread of Al-Qaeda's ideals has changed the world order by deepening fractures along 3 lines: traditionalists versus modernists, citizens versus their governments, and Westerners versus Muslims. In 1988, bin Laden created Al-Qaeda after defeating the Soviets in the Soviet-Afghan War so that he and the Mujahideen, or fighters of jihad, could stay together to continue their work as jihadists. In 1991, during the Gulf War, the Saudi government rejected aid from bin Laden's army in the fight against Iraq and instead invited the American army as an ally. An infuriated bin Laden publicly censured the Saudi government and was promptly exiled to Sudan. After this turning point, bin Laden officially declared the United States Al-Qaeda's primary target. Al-Qaeda appeals to its followers by provoking nostalgia for the golden age of Islamic civilization and by exploiting frustration with Western intervention in the Middle East. In the 800 years following Muhammad's foundation of Islam in the 7th century, Islamic civilization was a culturally and technologically advanced world power. However, by the mid-1800s, the Ottoman Empire, the center of Islamic civilization, was known as the sick man of Europe. After World War I, the Ottoman Empire collapsed, and European powers colonized Middle Eastern countries like Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Iraq. Colonization aroused in the Middle Easterners a bitter humiliation and a fierce nostalgia for their golden age. These feelings mingled with anger as the U.S. intervened further in the Middle East. Long-standing U.S. support of Israel angers many Middle Easterners who view Israel as the Palestinians' land. Ongoing U.S. reinforcement of oil-rich nations has also created bitterness, for the oil countries' citizens feel their governments are corrupt. Furthermore, Al-Qaeda's adherents are deeply opposed to American values based on their superficial exposure to America. In the 1960s, Islamic scholar Sayyid Qutb reignited the present hatred of America's values. Qutb published numerous incendiary writings that advocated the use of violence against Westerners and wayward Muslims, whom he deemed spiritually void, morally dissolute, and overly reverent to materialism and science. Qutb's violent opposition to Americans resonates in bin Laden's 1996 fatwa, or official religious declaration. The ruling to kill the Americans and their allies, civilians and military, is an individual duty for every Muslim who can do it in any country in which it is possible. Anti-American rhetoric easily gains sympathizers due to the Arab world's relative insularity. The majority of Arabs are rural dwellers who are exposed to a limited perspective of America. For example, annually, only 300 books are translated into Arabic, while 10,000 are translated into Spanish. Meanwhile, in the 1990s, the urban regions of the Middle East experienced the popularization of the Internet. The Internet's global success elevated Al-Qaeda from a radical fringe movement to a threatening force in the world. There have been 2 stages of Al-Qaeda's life as an organization. In its first stage, Al-Qaeda was centrally based in Afghanistan and Pakistan under the direct leadership of bin Laden. However, after 9/11, the American army captured or killed 75% of Al-Qaeda's members at the Battle of Tora Bora. Al-Qaeda's leaders narrowly escaped. The impending destruction of central Al-Qaeda by American troops created the necessity for an innovation that would decentralize Al-Qaeda and make members more elusive. As a solution, Al-Qaeda began to regroup online and initiated the creation of over 5,000 jihadist websites. On these websites, jihadists anywhere can browse heavy propaganda, learn to implement terrorist attacks, and exchange advice over online forums ranging from Al-Qaeda's websites to YouTube. Al-Qaeda has communicated over the internet more aggressively and extensively than any terror group in history. The absence of physical boundaries over the internet has allowed Al-Qaeda to transform into a decentralized organization composed of autonomous cells all over the world. Al-Qaeda is an organic and diverse array of local cells united by ideology. Similar to business franchises, cells are completely independent from Al-Qaeda's central leaders and can operate wherever they want. Cells use al-Qaeda as a logo and latch onto its network of collective contacts and resources. The House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence estimates that the number of al-Qaeda members directly linked to bin Laden has decreased to 600. Al-Qaeda expert Peter Bergen states, "Al-Qaeda the organization has been largely destroyed, and an ideological movement inspired by al-Qaeda has replaced it, spawning a new generation of homegrown or self-starting terrorists. Al-Qaeda's franchising innovation has led it to emerge as the first global terror network, operating on 6 continents in over 60 countries." Al-Qaeda's innovative terror franchise encourages anybody in the online world to be involved in Al-Qaeda's activity. Increasingly, members of the global franchise defy traditional profiling. Ayman al-Awlaki, an Al-Qaeda operative in Yemen, boasted, "Men and women in the West who were born in the West, raised in the West, educated in the West, whose culture is that of the West, are embracing the path of jihad." Due to its decentralization, Al-Qaeda has become the first fluid and untraceable terror organization. The internet is becoming increasingly pervasive in the lives of global citizens, especially among younger generations. Al-Qaeda's aggressive and extensive internet propaganda surrounds young Muslims and shapes their worldviews. The growing adoption of Al-Qaeda's worldview has deepened global conflict along 3 dichotomies. Al-Qaeda's internet propaganda has revived conflict between traditionalists and modernists. Traditionalists want to reform society based on their romanticized view of the Golden Age. The Muslim Empire would be unified under a combined church and state using strict Islamic law called the Sharia. On the other hand, modernists advocate reform based on social and technological modernization. Al-Qaeda's internet campaign supporting the traditional Wahhabists against the Saudi royal family demonstrates the deepened divide between traditionalists and modernists. Al-Qaeda's internet propaganda effectively harnesses the frustration of common citizens, ranging from the impoverished and illiterate to educated middle-class college students. For decades, Middle Eastern government reform has been riddled with corruption and failure. In addition, over 50% of the Arab world's population is younger than 25. Because of the economic turmoil in the Arab world, the men of this youth bulge have given up on economic advancement. Instead, they feel they can only make meaning in their lives by sacrificing themselves wholly to Al-Qaeda's cause. Al-Qaeda's influence has intensified insurgent movements and impeded growth in unstable countries like Iraq, Sudan, Somalia, and Yemen. This conflict between the government and citizens manifests itself differently in America and Europe. The Patriot Act of 2001 in America, and its parallel acts in European countries, authorized intelligence agencies to tap private conversations without warrants. To further the purpose of national security, the civil rights of Western citizens have arguably been curtailed. The Guantanamo Bay Detention Center in Cuba has also stirred public controversy among citizens over the constitutionality of aggressive interrogation tactics and the legal status of detainees. As a result of Al-Qaeda's repeated attacks on Westerners and other non-Muslims, worldwide media has portrayed Western and Islamic civilizations as being in conflict. Writing in 1993, political scientist Samuel Huntington anticipated, "The clash of civilizations will dominate global politics. The fault lines between civilizations will be the battle lines of the future." Media broadcasts advocating this idea provoke anti-Islamic rhetoric in audiences worldwide, even though neither Westerners nor Muslims can be generalized. Fewer than 1% of Muslims sympathize with Al-Qaeda. Nonetheless, hate crimes and law enforcement efforts against Muslims in the U.S. have increased, while Middle Easterners have developed an unflattering, neo-imperialist image of America. In a larger sense than just deepening conflicts along these 3 divides, Al-Qaeda's innovative internet exploitation has started a war without borders. By franchising its ideas globally, Al-Qaeda has enabled ideologically driven jihadists to infiltrate vulnerable communities worldwide. The anonymity of the internet makes the jihadists' activities nearly impossible to police, and no unified strategy has yet been developed to combat their ideology. Yet, the fight for liberal democracy has always prevailed through the courage of ordinary citizens. In this new age in terror pioneered by Al-Qaeda, the victors of the ideological war will not be militaries, but rather moderate Muslims in their persistent fight for freedom.